How does it feel to learn your entire life is a lie? For me, it felt like holding letters from my dead grandmother that explained I was an orphan, while simultaneously hearing the voices of my supposed parents downstairs arguing about the best way to steal my inheritance. The pieces of paper in my hand were not just paper, they were the architects of a demolition. My grandmother's script, a sequence of familiar loops and lines, detailed a history I had never known, a truth that aligned with the damning conversation happening just one floor below me. "She can't know the full amount," Mark's voice stated, a low, firm declaration that carried through the floorboards. "We'll tell her it's $50,000. That's more than enough for a state school. We need the rest for Leo." "What if she finds out?" Susan's response was a thread of anxiety. "Her grandmother's estate documents are public record, Mark. If she ever looks—" "She won't look," he cut in. "Why would she? She thinks it's from us, a gift. She'll be grateful for whatever we give her." Grateful. The word landed with the force of a physical blow as my eyes scanned the letters again. The money wasn't a gift. It wasn't their sacrifice. It was mine. An inheritance. My real mother's final provision for a daughter she would never meet. The full amount, according to the final letter from my grandmother, was just over $284,000. They were planning to steal over $230,000 from me and give it to their precious son, Leo. Their real son. The words on the page were a quiet, devastating weapon, confirming every ugly syllable I overheard. The woman I knew as my mother, Susan, was my aunt. Her sister, my biological mother, had not survived my birth. The man I called my father, Mark, was my uncle. They had taken me in, not out of love, but out of a begrudging sense of familial obligation. The letters trembled in my grasp. The world I had known, a place of confusing, cold indifference, was suddenly replaced by something far worse, a world of calculated, long-term deception. My life had not been a story of a difficult child failing to earn her parents' love. It had been the story of an unwanted burden, a financial obligation they had resented from the moment I was placed in their arms. The quiet dinners, the forgotten birthdays, the dismissed achievements, it all clicked into place, not as simple neglect, but as active, sustained hostility. I was an intruder in their home, and my inheritance was the price of my 18-year stay, a price they were now trying to avoid paying in full. A coldness spread through me, a profound and absolute chill that extinguished the fire of shock, leaving behind something hard and sharp. The question that had tormented me for my entire life, "Why don't they love me?" was finally answered. They didn't love me because they were never supposed to. I was not theirs to love. But this singular moment of terrible clarity was the culmination of a lifetime of questions. To understand the ice forming in my veins, to comprehend the plan that began to crystallize in my mind with unnerving speed, one must understand the preceding 18 years of shadow and silence. How did I arrive at this precipice, holding the truth in one hand and a life of lies in the other? The story does not begin here, with this shattering revelation. It begins, as all stories do, at the start. My earliest memories are not of events, but of atmospheres. They are formless, lacking in detail, but heavy with the emotional weight of my position within the family structure. I was a variable in an equation that never seemed to balance. The family unit consisted of 4 people: Mark, Susan, Leo, and me. Yet, functionally, it was a unit of 3, with me as a perpetual satellite, my orbit fixed, but my presence rarely acknowledged. My existence was a matter of logistics, not of connection. I was provided for in a technical sense. I had a room, clothes, and food. These were the facts of my life, the basic inputs of care. What was absent was everything else. The differential treatment between my brother Leo and me was not a secret. It was the central defining policy of our household. Leo, 2 years my younger, was the focal point around which Mark and Susan revolved. His every utterance was noted, his every minor achievement celebrated with a fervor that was bewildering. When Leo, at age 7, drew a barely recognizable depiction of a car, it was framed and hung in the main hallway. The next week, when I brought home a certificate from school for winning the district-wide spelling bee. Susan glanced at it, placed it on the kitchen counter, and said, "That's nice. Don't leave your clutter here." It was later moved to the top of the refrigerator, where it stayed until it was inadvertently thrown out with old coupons. This pattern repeated itself with a relentless, soul-crushing consistency. Leo's participation trophy for a soccer season in which he scored a single, accidental goal was placed on the mantelpiece. My first-place award in the regional science fair for a project on the mathematical principles of cellular automata was met with a distracted nod from Mark, who was busy helping Leo with a model airplane. The discrepancy was so stark, so blatant, that even as a child I understood it was intentional. It wasn't that they were incapable of praise or affection. It was that they had a finite supply, and it was reserved exclusively for Leo. My attempts to solicit affection were met with a quiet, impenetrable wall of dismissal. I recall one instance when I was perhaps 9 years old. I had spent an entire afternoon working on a story, a complex narrative about a girl who discovers a hidden world. I was proud of it and wanted to share it. I found Susan in the living room, reading a magazine. I stood before her, holding my handwritten pages, and asked if I could read it to her. She looked up, her expression unchanging, and said, "Maya, I'm busy right now." She was not busy. The magazine lay open on her lap, the television was off, the house was quiet. Her busyness was a state of being, a permanent condition that manifested only when I required something of her time, her attention, her approval. I retreated to my room and put the story in a drawer. I never asked again. Physical contact was a foreign language in our home, at least as it pertained to me. I would watch Susan hug Leo, a full, encompassing embrace, for something as simple as him leaving for school. I, on the other hand, could not recall a single instance of a voluntary hug from either of them. The only physical contact I received was functional, a hand on my shoulder to move me out of the way, a brief touch to take a dish from my hand. It was the contact one would have with a piece of furniture, not a person. This absence created a void, a persistent ache for a connection that I could see but never experience. Birthdays were a particularly clear illustration of this dynamic. Leo's birthdays were elaborate affairs. Friends were invited, a themed cake was ordered weeks in advance, and a mountain of presents would be waiting for him. My birthdays were acknowledgments, not celebrations. There would be a generic cake from the supermarket. Their gift would be a single impersonal item, a sweater in a color I never wore, a book from a genre I had no interest in. It was a gesture performed out of obligation, a box checked on the annual calendar of parental duties. One year, my 16th birthday, they forgot entirely. It wasn't until Leo asked at dinner why there was no cake that a flicker of recognition crossed their faces. Mark left the table and returned 10 minutes later with a pack of cupcakes from the all-night convenience store. "Happy birthday," he said, placing them in front of me. There was no apology, only the tacit understanding that my milestone was an inconvenience. School events were another arena of disparity. Parent-teacher conferences for Leo were mandatory appointments. They would attend together, sitting attentively as his teacher described his potential and developing social skills, euphemisms for his academic mediocrity and disruptive behavior. For my conferences, only one, if any, would attend. More often than not, they would simply sign the form I brought home, forgoing the meeting altogether. "Your grades are fine," Susan once said, as if my academic success made their involvement superfluous. "We don't need to go." It never occurred to them that my desire for their presence had nothing to do with my grades and everything to do with a simple human need for my accomplishments to be witnessed by the people who were supposed to care about me most. The narrative they constructed, the one I internalized for so long, was that I was the problem. I was too serious, too quiet, too independent. My self-sufficiency, a trait I developed as a survival mechanism, was reframed as a flaw, a reason for their detachment. "Maya doesn't need us the way Leo does," Susan would say to her friends on the phone, a statement that was both a justification for her neglect and a self-fulfilling prophecy. I didn't need them because I had learned, through painful trial and error, that they were not available to be needed. This history of neglect was not a series of dramatic confrontations, but a slow, steady erosion of self-worth. It was 1,000 small cuts, each one a reminder of my status as an outsider. It was the way they spoke about me when they thought I couldn't hear, describing me in terms of cost and effort. It was the way their faces would register a flicker of annoyance when I entered a room where they were laughing with Leo, as if my very presence was an interruption of their happiness. I became an expert at making myself small, at minimizing my needs, at becoming as unobtrusive as possible. I learned to live in the margins of my own family, a ghost in the machine of their lives. And for 18 years, I believed this was my fault. I believed I was fundamentally unlovable, a defective product that had failed to inspire the one thing a child is supposed to be guaranteed, the love of their parents. Amidst the barren emotional landscape of my home, there was one oasis, my grandmother. She was Susan's mother, a fact that would later become imbued with a tragic irony. To me, she was simply Grandma Elena, and she was the only person in my life who saw me. Her affection was not a reward for good behavior or a strategic allocation of resources. It was a constant, unconditional fact. Where my home was a place of silence and unspoken rules, her small apartment was a sanctuary of acceptance. Grandma Elena never spoke ill of Mark and Susan. In retrospect, her silence on the matter was a masterclass in diplomacy. She did not attempt to contradict the reality of my daily life, but instead worked to build a separate reality for me, a place where I was valued. When I visited her, she would ask about my science projects, not just my grades. She wanted to understand the principles behind my experiments, her questions born of genuine curiosity. She read the stories I wrote, not as a chore, but with an engaged interest, discussing the characters and their motivations as if they were real people. She celebrated my successes with a quiet, profound pride that felt more validating than any grand gesture could have. She was the one who taught me to look for patterns, not just in science and mathematics, but in the world around me. Everything has a structure, Maya, she would say. You just have to be patient enough to find it. We would work on logic puzzles together, and she would show me how to break down a complex problem into smaller, manageable parts. She nurtured the analytical part of my mind, the very part that Mark and Susan dismissed as being too serious. She saw it not as a flaw, but as a strength. Her home was a testament to a life lived with intention. It was a small space, but every object had a story. She didn't have much money, but she possessed a wealth of knowledge and experience. She was the keeper of our family's history, or so I thought. She would tell me stories about her own childhood, about my grandfather who had passed away before I was born, and about her 2 daughters, Susan, and another whose name she rarely mentioned. When I asked about her other daughter, a quiet sadness would enter her expression. Her name was Lily, she would say, and then gently change the subject. I assumed the topic was simply too painful, and I learned not to press. Lily, my mother. The word now feels alien. A person I never knew, yet whose existence defines my own. The last time I saw Grandma Elena, she was in the hospital. She knew she was dying. The strength that had always defined her was fading, but her mind remained sharp. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "There's a box for you in my closet," she told me, her voice a low whisper. "Everything in it is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." At the time, I thought she was referring to sentimental keepsakes, photographs, old jewelry, the things one passes down. I didn't understand the gravity of her words, the literal and legal weight they carried. She passed away 2 days later. Mark and Susan's grief seemed performative and brief. They were more concerned with the logistics of the funeral and the clearing out of her apartment. I was allowed to go with them to sort through her belongings. While they quickly divided up the few items of monetary value, I went to her closet and found the box she had mentioned. It was a simple, sturdy wooden box with a small, unassuming lock. I showed it to Susan. "Grandma said this was for me," I said. Susan glanced at it. "It's probably just old junk. We can look through it at home." She took it from me, her expression unreadable. At home, the box was placed in my closet and promptly forgotten by them. But not by me. It was the last thing my grandmother had given me, her final message. I didn't open it right away. Part of me was afraid of the finality it represented. As long as it remained closed, it felt like a part of her was still with me, a conversation waiting to be had. For years, it sat in my closet, a silent monument to the only person who had ever truly loved me. I had no idea that it contained not just memories, but the key to my entire life, waiting for the right moment to be turned. The college fund was more than just money. It was a symbol. In a life devoid of tangible evidence of parental care, the fund was my single data point to the contrary. It was the answer I gave myself whenever the doubts became too loud. They may not show it, but they saved for my future. They have a plan for me. This belief became a critical part of my psychological scaffolding, the one beam that held up the whole precarious structure of my hope. Freedom, independence, a life of my own choosing, all of it was contingent on that fund. It was my escape route, and I believed they were the ones who had drawn the map. The topic first came up when I began my junior year of high school. College applications were on the horizon, and financial aid forms required detailed information. I approached the subject with caution, as one would approach a sleeping predator. I waited until after dinner one evening, when the mood was as neutral as it ever got. I need to start looking at the financial aid requirements for college applications, I began, my voice even. I was wondering if you could give me the information for the college fund you set up. Mark looked up from his newspaper, a slight frown on his face. It's all taken care of, Maya. You don't need to worry about the details. Some of the applications ask for specifics, I pressed gently. Account numbers, balances, it's for the FAFSA and the CSS profile. We'll handle it when the time comes, Susan said, her tone signaling the end of the discussion. Just focus on your grades and getting accepted. We'll take care of the rest. Their evasiveness was frustrating, but not yet suspicious. I rationalized it as their way of handling things. They were private people, and finances were a private matter. I told myself they were trying to shield me from the stress of it all. I accepted their answer and resolved to ask again later. Over the next year, I would bring it up periodically, each time with more urgency. Each time I was met with a new form of deflection. We're in the process of moving some things around, Mark would say. Or, it's invested in a complex portfolio, the numbers fluctuate, from Susan. They were masters of the non-answer, of using just enough financial jargon to sound authoritative while providing zero actual information. My requests were always polite, always reasonable, but they were treated as an imposition, an annoying complication to their lives. The more they evaded, the more the fund's importance grew in my mind. It became a locked room I was desperate to enter. I imagined a healthy balance, a number that would open doors to universities far away from home, places where I could reinvent myself, where I could be someone other than the quiet, overlooked girl from a cold house. The fund wasn't just tuition money, it was the promise of a new identity. My acceptance letters began to arrive in the spring of my senior year. I was accepted into several excellent programs, including my top choice, a university on the other side of the country, renowned for its computational biology program. The acceptance was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a validation of years of hard work. I showed the acceptance letter to Mark and Susan. "That's nice, dear," Susan said, barely looking at the letterhead. "Is it expensive?" "It is," I admitted. "But with the college fund, it should be manageable. Now I really need the financial information to finalize my aid package." The look that passed between them was instantaneous and, for the first time, deeply alarming. It was a flicker of shared panic. "We need to have a discussion about this, Maya," Mark said, his voice taking on a formal, serious tone that he usually reserved for Leo's major transgressions. "That school might be a bit of a reach financially. But the fund," I started, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "You've been saving since I was a baby. That's what you always said." "Well, things change," he said vaguely. "The market hasn't been great. We'll sit down and go over the numbers with you, soon." But they never did. Days turned into weeks. Deadlines for accepting admission offers and submitting financial documents loomed. My anxiety mounted with each passing day. My dream, the future I had so carefully constructed, felt like it was slipping through my fingers, blocked by their infuriating, inexplicable secrecy. It was their behavior during this period, their heightened agitation and whispered conversations, that finally pushed me from frustration into suspicion. The structure of my belief system was beginning to groan under the strain. The foundation was about to crack. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday evening. The air in the house was thick with a tension that was palpable even by our standards. I had just received a final, urgent email from my preferred university regarding my financial aid documentation. The deadline was in less than a week. I knew I had to force the issue. As I came down the stairs, preparing my speech, I heard them arguing in the kitchen. I stopped on the bottom step, concealed by the wall. "She's not going to let it go," Susan said, her voice strained. "She keeps asking for the account statements. What are we going to do?" I'll handle it, Mark snapped. I'll create a doctored statement. Show her a balance of 50,000. She won't know the difference. That's fraud, Mark. What if she finds out? What if Elena's lawyer contacts her? The will stated the executor had to inform her of the trust on her 18th birthday. The lawyer is dead. I checked, and Elena is gone. No one is going to tell her. We just have to hold our ground. It's our money now, for our family, for Leo. The words struck me with a physical force. Elena's lawyer, the will, the trust. It wasn't their money. It was from my grandmother. My polite request suddenly seemed laughably naive. I wasn't asking for a gift. I was asking for my own property, which they were actively plotting to conceal from me. A wave of nausea and cold fury washed over me. I backed away from the stairs, retreating silently to my room, their words echoing in my mind. My entire life, I had been trying to solve the puzzle of their indifference, operating under the assumption that the pieces I had were the only ones that existed. Now I knew there was a whole other set of pieces, a hidden history that held the answer. My gaze fell upon the wooden box in my closet. Everything in it is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Grandma Elena's final words. Suddenly, they were no longer a sentimental farewell, but a direct instruction, a warning. I pulled the box from the shelf. The small lock was simple, the kind found on a diary. I had no key, but a paper clip from my desk, bent into a new shape, was sufficient. It took only a few moments of manipulation before I heard a faint click. I lifted the lid. The top layer consisted of the expected mementos, a few old monochrome photographs of people I didn't recognize, a silver locket, a pressed flower. Beneath them, however, was a thick bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were addressed to my grandmother. The return address was from the very hospital where she had passed away, but the dates were from 18 years ago. The handwriting on the envelopes was not hers. It was delicate, precise, and unfamiliar. I untied the ribbon and pulled out the first letter. "Dear Mom," it began. "The doctors say I don't have much time left, but they think I have enough to meet her. I'm scared, but I'm so full of love for this little life inside me. I've made all the arrangements with the lawyer, just as we discussed. The trust will be there for her when she turns 18. It's everything Dad and I saved. Everything I have to give her. Please, make sure she knows how much I wanted her, how much I loved her, even before we met. If anything happens to me, I know you and Susan will take care of her. Give her my locket. Tell her my stories. Tell her her mother, Lily, loved her more than anything." Lily, my mother. The name I had heard only once or twice, spoken with a quiet sadness by my grandmother. The puzzle pieces slammed into place, with dizzying, brutal force. Susan was my aunt. My mother was her sister, Lily. She had died giving birth to me. I tore through the other letters, my hands shaking. They were a chronicle of my mother's final weeks, filled with hope for my arrival and fear for her own health. The final letter in the stack was not from my mother, but from my grandmother, written only a year before her own death. It was addressed to me. "My dearest Maya," it read, "I hope you never have to read this. I hope that when you turn 18, Susan and Mark will tell you the truth themselves, with love and honesty. But I am old, and I fear they will not. I fear their resentment has only grown over the years. You must understand, it was never your fault. Your mother, my beautiful Lily, loved you with her entire being. When she died, a part of Susan died too. She and Mark took you in, but they have always seen you as the cause of their loss, not as a gift Lily left behind. They are not bad people, but they are weak, and they have been dishonest. The money they have told you is a college fund is, in fact, your inheritance, a trust left to you by Lily. The full principal is approximately $284,350. It is legally and morally yours. Do not let them take it from you. It is your mother's final gift, your key to a future she desperately wanted you to have. Be strong, my clever girl. Use that wonderful analytical mind of yours. You are your mother's daughter. You are a survivor." The letter fell from my fingers. The air left my lungs. The quiet, sterile room around me seemed to warp and distort. I was not Maya, the unloved daughter. I was Maya, the orphaned niece, the resented obligation, the secret heiress. The argument I had overheard downstairs was not about withholding a gift. It was about committing theft, grand theft, betrayal of a dying sister's last wish, deception of a child placed in their care. Every memory I had, every moment of neglect, was instantly recontextualized. It was not a failure of love. It was a failure of character. Theirs, not mine. The coldness I had felt earlier returned, but this time it was different. It was not the passive cold of shock, but the active, focused cold of absolute zero. It was the temperature of pure, methodical resolve. The grief would come later. Right now, there was only the plan. I sat on the floor of my room, the letters spread out around me like the wreckage of a life. The muffled sounds of the television floated up from downstairs, a surreal soundtrack to my world's implosion. For a moment, my mind was a white void, a space wiped clean of emotion and thought. The shock was a physical presence, a weight pressing down on me, making it difficult to process the sequence of revelations. My mother was not my mother. My father was not my father. My life was a lie. My inheritance was being stolen. Each fact was a separate, sharp-edged object that I had to pick up and examine. But the void did not last. Into that empty space, a new feeling began to seep, something cold and unfamiliar. It was not grief for the parents I never had, nor was it anger at the aunt and uncle who had deceived me. It was something clearer, harder. It was resolve. My grandmother's words from her final letter echoed in my mind. Use that wonderful, analytical mind of yours. She had known this day might come. She had armed me. The logic puzzles we used to solve, the way she taught me to break down complex problems into smaller parts, it was all training. I was not a victim cowering in her room. I was a strategist presented with a problem. The problem was Mark and Susan. The solution was escape. The means was my inheritance. The tears I thought would come never did. Instead, a chilling clarity settled over me. The years of emotional malnutrition had, it seemed, prepared me for this moment. I had been trained to operate without sentiment, to rely on myself, to observe and analyze without expectation of comfort. My internal monologue, which for years had been a loop of self-doubt and questions of worth, shifted its focus with terrifying efficiency. The question was no longer, why don't they love me? The question was, how do I take back what is mine and disappear? My mind began to work, assembling a plan with the detached precision of a machine. My objective was twofold: secure my inheritance and leave without a confrontation. A direct confrontation was pointless. It would lead to histrionics, lies, and attempts to manipulate me. They had proven they were not open to reason or morality. They would try to stop me, to delay, to wear me down. I could not allow that. I had to operate in secret, a ghost in their house for just a little while longer. First, the money. Grandma Elena's letter gave me the name of the bank and the approximate amount. It was a trust. Trusts have specific rules. I needed to gain access. My 18th birthday had been 2 months ago. According to the letter and the snippet of conversation I'd overheard, the executor of my grandmother's will was supposed to have contacted me. Mark had said the lawyer was dead. Convenient, but the bank was not. I turned to my computer, my fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. I feigned normalcy for the next 3 days. It was the greatest performance of my life. I went down for meals. I answered their questions about school with monosyllabic replies, which was normal for me. I kept my expression neutral, my posture unchanged. Inside, I was a whirlwind of activity, a covert operative in my own home. My bedroom became my command center. I spent hours online, my screen dimmed to its lowest setting, researching trust fund access for beneficiaries, interstate banking laws, and methods for creating a new, untraceable identity. My first major breakthrough came from a simple search of the bank's name, combined with Trust Department beneficiary access. I found a portal for trust and estate clients. It required a social security number, date of birth, and an account number. I had the first two. The account number was the problem. I thought back to the box. Had I missed something? I carefully examined every item again. Tucked into the lining of the silver locket, I found a tiny, folded piece of paper. On it was a sequence of numbers. It had to be it. With a deep breath, I entered the information into the online portal. Social security number, date of birth, the long string of digits from the locket. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the page refreshed. At the top, in the bank's formal font, were the words, "Welcome, Maya A. Wallace. Beneficiary, Lily Wallace Trust." My mother's name, my real last name. And below it, the current balance, $286,412.37. The number was larger than my grandmother had estimated. It had been growing. It was real. Seeing it there, a concrete digital fact, solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. Mark and Susan had access as trustees, but I now had access as the sole beneficiary who had come of age. The next step was to move the money. I couldn't just wire it to my local checking account, which they monitored. I needed a new, secure account that they knew nothing about. My research led me to an online-only bank, known for its robust security and quick setup process. Using my birth certificate and social security card, which I retrieved from the important documents file in Mark's office while they were out grocery shopping, I opened a new high-yield savings account under my own name. The entire process took less than 15 minutes. Now came the most critical part, the transfer. I logged back into the trust portal. The interface was old, designed for wealth managers, not teenagers, but it was logical. I found the section for distributions. I initiated a full transfer of the entire balance to my new account. I typed in the routing and account numbers for my newly created haven. The system asked for a reason for the distribution. I paused, then typed, "Beneficiary attainment of legal age." I clicked Submit. A confirmation message appeared. "Your request has been submitted." Transfers are typically processed within 1 to 2 business days. 1 to 2 business days. That was my window. I had to maintain the facade for just a little longer. I spent the time planning my physical escape. I couldn't take much. A single backpack. I packed the essentials, my important documents, a few changes of clothes, the small box of my grandmother's things, my laptop. Everything else was disposable. I researched bus routes, looking for a destination far enough away to be a clean break, but large enough to disappear into. I settled on a city 3 states away, a place with a major university and a diverse job market. I bought a one-way ticket online, printing the confirmation at the public library to avoid using our home printer. The 2 days of waiting were the most difficult. I was a coiled spring. I observed Mark and Susan with a new, chilling objectivity, their mundane conversations, their complaints about work, their fawning over Leo. It was all like watching a play whose script I had already read. They were no longer the enigmatic, powerful figures who held my future in their hands. They were small, weak people, architects of a petty, cruel deception. There was a moment when Susan tried to make small talk, asking about my plans for the summer. "I'm still figuring things out," I replied, the double meaning known only to me. It was surprisingly easy to lie to them, to mirror the dishonesty they had shown me for 18 years. On the evening of the second day, I received an email from my new bank. "Your funds have been successfully deposited." I logged in. The balance was there. $286,412.37. My money, my mother's legacy, my freedom. The plan was now in its final stage. That night was the Last Supper. I sat at the dining table with them, the 3 of them, a family I had never truly been a part of. The food was bland, the conversation stilted, the same as 1,000 other nights. But tonight, I was not the sullen, withdrawn girl in the corner. I was an observer, a scientist studying a foreign species. I watched the way Mark cut his meat, the way Susan pushed her food around her plate, the way Leo talked endlessly about a video game. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound and final detachment. They were figures from a past life, ghosts at a table I was about to leave forever. I ate my food, I cleared my plate, I said goodnight, my voice even and calm. "Good night, Maya," Susan said, not looking up from her phone. Mark grunted in acknowledgement. It was the perfect anticlimactic end to our non-relationship. Back in my room, I waited. I watched the clock on my computer screen, tracking the hours as they passed. Midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. The house was finally still, submerged in the deep silence of the night. I shouldered my backpack. It felt lighter than I expected. I walked over to my desk and took out a single piece of paper and a pen. I thought about what to write. A long, scathing letter detailing their every transgression. A message of pure hatred. Number. That would grant them an importance they didn't deserve. My actions were the message. The words were just a confirmation. I kept it brief. I know everything, I wrote. About my mother, Lily, about the trust. The money is mine, and I have taken it. Do not look for me. I didn't sign it. They would know who it was from. I folded the paper and left it in the center of my perfectly made bed, a final, sterile statement in a sterile room. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't look back at the room that had been my prison. I didn't pause to consider the life I was leaving. There was nothing there for me to miss. I moved silently through the dark house, every step sure and practiced. The front door made a soft click as I closed it behind me. The night air was just air. I walked down the silent suburban street, my backpack a comfortable weight on my shoulders. I did not run. I walked with a steady, determined pace towards the 24-hour bus station on the other side of town. Each step was a move away from the lie and towards an unknown but authentic future. I was not running from something. I was walking towards everything. The conclusion of my story, for now, takes place on a bus. The motion is steady, a rhythmic forward propulsion that mirrors my own state of mind. The world outside the window is a blur of indistinct shapes, a landscape being shed, left behind. My destination is still hours away. I have a new bank account, a backpack with my entire life inside it, and a future that is a complete and total blank. For the first time, there is no script, no expectations to fail, no invisible standard to fall short of. The fear is there, a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of my resolve, the fear of the unknown, of being truly and utterly alone. But it is overshadowed by a much more powerful sensation: liberation. The heavy cloak of being unwanted, of being wrong, has been lifted. The truth, as devastating as it was, has also been a release. I am not the problem I was raised to believe I was. I am the daughter of Lily Wallace. I am the keeper of my grandmother's faith. I am a survivor who has just executed a perfect escape. I lean my head against the glass of the window. I do not know what I will do when the bus finally stops. I will find a place to live. I will enroll in a university, my university, the one I chose. I will study. I will build a life, one of my own design, from the ground up. It will be difficult, and it will be lonely, but it will be real, and it will be mine. The road ahead is unwritten, and for the first time in my life, I am the one holding the pen.